go. Okay. I'm going to take attendance. Assuming attendance will pull up on my phone. I should have done this beforehand. So there we go. Caleb, that's you. Okay, man. I didn't even know. Andy, I saw you. Okay, Emma, I saw you come in. Okay. Lauren, Haven, Chloe is the quarantine. Melissa. By the way, if I call you by a name and you don't want to be called by that name, let me know. Tell me what to call you. No, Melissa. Connor. Megan. Casey is totally online. Riley. Adam. Julianne. Did I get that right? Caroline. Noah. Catherine. Anybody's name I didn't call? Yes. Sarah. Oh, I must have scrolled up slightly. So yeah, you're on here. All right, we're good. I will do my best to learn your names. I'm making no promises because if I can only see your eyes, that's not a lot to go on. Okay. So I'm usually pretty good with names. Like a week 2 into the semester, I'm usually all right, but we may be a while. And if you call me by the wrong name, I'm not going to take offense either. Okay. Or if you just say, hey, you, that's fine. Right? And it really, there's no way to predict it. Like I've had classes where like a student is really involved and making comments, and it takes me like a month into the semester before I finally figure that person's name out. And somebody who never says anything, for whatever reason, their name sticks from the beginning. So it is no offense meant to anyone if I do not know your name. Okay, but I'll get there. So you are in a history of ancient Greece class. You're here on purpose? Yeah? Now I'm curious actually, why did you want to take this class? What's the appeal? Yeah.
Well, when I was a kid, I was really interested in ancient Greece. Like it was like my passion, but they never taught it because they were too busy teaching about the Declaration of Independence. So it was like my only chance to actually learn about it.
I hope I don't disappoint. That's a lot of pressure. Dang. Okay. Very good. Anybody else? Yeah.
It sounded cool.
Sounded cool. Hopefully it is. Anyone else? Andy?
It's always interesting when we go over in your one-on-one class.
Okay. So,
That was interesting.
right. So you wanted to learn more about it. Okay. Is it Riley?
It is.
For whatever reason, your name
Nice.
stuck from the beginning. Okay.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah. But I'm not making no promises for next time.
I took an ancient world class previously, and I really loved it.
Okay.
So it was more like Rome focused, with
Yeah.
Roman and Troy. So we kind of briefly touched the Odyssey and stuff, but
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I teach both ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and honestly, I'm not sure which one I like more. I probably know more about Rome, honestly, but I've studied it more. But Greece is really fascinating. I have delved rather deeply into, especially things like Athenian tragedy, which I love, which is why I'm making you read, some Aeschylus and some Sophocles and stuff like that this semester. Because I absolutely love the Athenian tragedies and the comedies for that matter. So we're reading some Aristophanes too. Anyone else? You're all just like, I'm here. Yeah.
No one else has said it, so I have to. Percy Jackson.
Very good. Okay. That is the sum total of exposure that a lot of people these days get.
I saw Clash of the Titans, and I was like, yeah. Exactly.
You watched that?
Yeah.
Like the old school Clash of the
Yeah, the
Titans?
new one's
Like
trash.
I thought the old one was
Claymation.
too, but yeah. I think I watched Clash of the Titans when I was like a little kid or something. I don't remember anything about it. There are some, what's the right adjective here? I'm not going to use an adjective. There are some films about ancient Greece, okay?
There are films back there.
I'm not sure I have ever seen a film about ancient Greece that is that is especially appealing, right? 10 years ago or so, every student wanted to talk about 300. Whenever I would bring up Sparta, they'd be like, 300, have you seen that? You got to watch it, Dr. Young. I never watched it. I was like, oh yeah, I'll get around to that. I know I should, and I never actually saw the film. So, if you have seen 300 and are passionately committed as these students were, to that depiction of Sparta, then maybe you can convince me sometime this semester to watch it. I have not, often in these kinds of classes, I assign films, but I can't think of a single film that I would want to make an assignment out of for ancient Greece. It's really unfortunate, right, that is the case. Anyway, there are actually some filmed versions of some of the tragedies that are really fantastic, but we're going to read the text instead of watching the films. You're more than welcome to go watch the film in addition to that, right? It might help you. So yeah, there's a lot of popular culture though about ancient Greece, and this is the exposure that many of you get, either Bruce Jackson or something. You finally got it to come up. Okay, awesome. I'm glad to know you're cleared. So, all right. Well, I realized about an hour ago that I needed to amend the syllabus because I realized that there was a 4th edition of the textbook that I had ordered and then kind of promptly forgot about it. And I looked on my shelf and looked at the syllabus and saw that everything was the 3rd edition and that I didn't, in fact, have a copy of the 4th edition. So just to show what you can accomplish when you're really determined to do something, I ran over to the bookstore, got the book, and changed the whole syllabus. And right before I walked down here, I put the new one up. So if you were looking at the old syllabus, there's some slight changes just to the page numbers of that book. So, don't get, if you printed it out or something, you probably want to print out a new syllabus or at least look at the changes. They're very minor. It's usually only a page or two of difference. And of course, my computer has a mind of its own and randomly turns off Wi-Fi. About a week ago, they decided to update my computer without telling me. And so, I had everything synced to both iCloud and OneDrive, thankfully. But on the other hand, all of that disappeared. I had my desktop synced and everything, and I looked at my desktop and it was blank. Nothing's there. I had to dig into the interior folders, delve into the mysteries of the inner computer to finally locate all of my files. And so it was a bit of a mess, but I got everything. But my computer's been doing really strange things ever since then. So hopefully all of this works. Okay, let's take a look at the syllabus here. One little change here. I'm just going to do my office hours on Zoom. Okay. If you would like to meet with me in person, I am open to that. And my office is such that I can put a chair kind of in the corner and be 6 feet away from you, so it's no problem. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to hang around with a Zoom window open on Wednesdays from 11 to 1 and Fridays from 1 to 3. I will put an announcement on Canvas. I haven't done it for this class yet, my apologies, but I will put an announcement that has the link to my Zoom room. I'm using a personal account rather than the Flagler account because there are a lot of people using that Flagler account and it's likely to have problems. If you want to meet with me, there will be a waiting room. I'm not going to have a password unless something bad happens. But there will be, we'll see if somebody Zoom bombs me. I will have a waiting room. If I don't let you in immediately, it's probably because I have another student in there. And so just wait patiently, just like you would sit in the hallway on the 5th floor to wait for a professor. Any questions about that? Okay, my email address is the best way to get in touch with me, though sending a message on Canvas is just as valid. It comes straight to my email. The course description is pretty bland. I wrote it a few years ago, probably without thinking much about it. Okay. Class will seek to understand the political, religious, economic, cultural, and social development of the Greek-speaking world from about 1500 BCE to through the decline of the Hellenistic kingdoms. So this covers close to 1500 years of history. This is a monstrous amount of time to try to talk about. It's not quite so bad as Western Civ, but that said, we're not going to try to do everything in that 1500 year span, right? We will, like I say, post hole, okay, into specific topics, right? We're going to read the whole Odyssey, for instance, which I think is a fascinating text. We're going to read some Athenian tragedies. We're going to read some Plato, a couple of Platonic dialogues. We're going to read, we're going to look at some art, right? And try to make sense of all of that and spend most of our time on that. We're going to read a couple of secondary source monographs on specific topics. One which which tends to produce a great deal of consternation and even loathing in students. And I will explain that later. But I've chosen these because they're provocative and I think interesting, hopefully. Well, it will include an outline of political history. Its main emphasis will be social and cultural in nature, right? And especially the latter. Let's make sure we're on the same page. What do those terms mean? What do we when we talk about social? What are we talking about? Some of you have had this discussion with me so many times. Now, some of you are new to my classes. What is a society? What are we talking about? Got nothing. Okay. You're a lively bunch. How people interact with each other? That's exactly right. Okay, this has to do with human interactions. The way people organize themselves, the way they form things like hierarchies and structures. So when we talk about social, we're talking about structural things, right? And so we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the structures of the Athenian democracy and the structures of the Spartan polis. To cite two examples, we'll spend a fair amount of time on both of those. Now, cultural is different, at least as we're going to use it in here. What would cultural? If I use the phrase high culture, it has nothing to do with drugs. Or maybe it does for some people. Well, okay. But that, I mean, talking about class structures would be part of social.
It's like the aesthetic.
Well, yeah, actually, that's an important component of culture, right? Aesthetic sensibilities. In ancient Greece, only a select number of people could read and write, or had the money to commission or, in fact, produce works of art. Literature and art is high culture, as we call it, okay? As opposed to popular culture, which would be what? So high culture is literary and visual, like purposely visual, what would popular culture? Gotta get those wheels turning here, okay? Not written, but spoken, oral, okay? So things like folklore and what we call popular religion. That is not the religion that the authorities over the religious rituals dictate. The Greeks didn't have much by way of theology, as we might call it, okay? But they did have a set of beliefs, and some of these were articulated by literate individuals, by literate texts, okay? But most people couldn't read and write, and so, that doesn't mean they didn't believe in something. That form of belief, the popular religion, is much more difficult to access.
we have ways of accessing it, but it's tough. Right? We have to read between the lines of things like written text and art and artifacts and stuff like this. Okay. Sometimes we have to look for allusions to oral tales that were never written down, or at least that are not extant, haven't survived. But Greece, of course, had a robust culture. So, broadly speaking, the definition of culture, at least as we use it in here, is the stuff that comes out of the human mind. The way that human beings imagine or make sense cognitively of the world around them and of themselves as individuals within that broad world. Right? And so things like religion and folklore, both written and oral, right, are part of culture. As is philosophy for that matter. Okay, and the Greeks, of course, are seen as having invented philosophy, at least the Western philosophical tradition. And so that's something we need to look at. So yeah, we're going to look a lot at the organization of the societies, the structures of the Greek polis, and things that both preceded and succeeded it. And we're going to look at the way the Greeks imagined their world. And try to access that primarily through high culture, through literature and art, but we will try to access some of the popular cultures. Students will be expected to grapple with both primary sources from and secondary sources about these civilizations. What are those? What are primary sources? This is a history class. I would hope every hand goes up here. If you're taking this because you like it and you're not a history student, then you are excused. But you will only be excused for today. After this, you have to know this. Right. What's a primary source? Sources from that time. Okay, thank you very much. Now, there's a problem with ancient Greece and primary sources. Right? And I've had students once in a while, when we've read monographs that come from pre-modern periods, whether the ancient or the medieval worlds, who say, I just really don't buy this argument because they're relying only on a couple of sources here. They really need to find more sources for this to be convincing. And okay, why are you laughing? I'm just wondering.
Because there aren't that.
Okay, because unfortunately, in many cases, there are no other sources. This is what we have. Right? And we just have to make sense of it somehow. Okay? It would be so wonderful if we uncovered a treasure trove of ancient Greeks who wrote down their day-to-day activities and what they thought about them. If we had, in other words, journals or diaries from ancient Greece. What's that?
And a Rosetta Stone for it.
And a Rosetta Stone, yeah. Something, especially if it was linear edge. We don't have anything of the sort. Nothing. Right, that tells us that offers a direct perspective of especially common folk in, not the educated elite, but common people of ancient Greece, the vast majority of people, in other words, who lived in this. We have very little from anyone, truth be told. And so, doing ancient history is very different, a very different exercise than doing modern history. Okay. And so, if you're accustomed to classes on American history or modern European history, if you're taking Dr. Butler or you're taking Dr. Enright, okay, and that's wonderful. These are all wonderful teachers. They're my colleagues. I respect them deeply. But the methodologies for this kind of history are vastly different. Right? That's one of the reasons that both ancient Greece and ancient Rome are placed in a different category among the history classes, because the methodology is light years away from trying to do 20th century American history. In some cases, go directly to the individuals who were involved and do interviews with them. We can do oral history. Okay, we have a glut of sources, and one of the issues in doing modern history is trying to differentiate between the sources and see which ones are most relevant, because we absolutely cannot. This is the other thing it does. It like doesn't recognize my connection to the email, right? I get these warnings all the time. Okay, sorry. We can't do that with ancient history. We have to take the sources we have, corroborate them as much as we can with other sources. In some cases, take a written text and try to corroborate it with the material remains, the archaeology, and do the best we can to make sense of it. Okay? But there is still a tremendous amount of scope for creativity and for interpretation in all of this. So, get accustomed to just thinking differently. Still thinking historically, for sure, but thinking differently and approaching things like this. Questions about that? In some cases, we can't even get close to the events in question. The source that we have might be from a couple hundred years after, and they purport to have read accounts from people who were there or were closer to the event. But those records which they claim to have read haven't survived, right? And so we might take a source like Plutarch, who actually lived outside of the whole period of history we're going to cover in this class. He lived in the 2nd century CE. He was a Greek living under Roman rule. And we might have to use him to understand something about Alexander the Great. Because Plutarch claims to have read historians, who kept records, who actually knew Alexander or who traveled with him, or at least were closer in time to Alexander. Okay. Alexander didn't leave anything behind himself. No one who knew him directly left anything behind that has survived, right? So even a figure of such import as Alexander the Great, we just don't have direct sources. We have to make do with what we have. What are secondary sources? Yes. Okay, yes, but this is going to be problematic if we use that exact definition, because often the primary sources we have are actually secondary or tertiary, or what's the next thing? Quadrenary, whatever it is. Right? There's actually a slightly different definition, and that's not an invalid definition, because some of these things are secondary. But as historians use the term secondary source, it means what? Anybody else want to take a stab? Okay, be more specific. It's a good start.
Yeah.
What kind of books? No?
Isn't it like an interpretation of the primary source?
That's right. Yeah. So modern authors, scholars, usually, hopefully, writing interpretations, accessing the primary sources, and coming up with some argument about what it all means. A work of history, or other disciplines have these too, of course. You find these in political science and anthropology and economics and so forth and so on. But works of history on a narrow topic with an argument backed up by evidence are called monographs. The word mono meaning in this case like singular or specific, right? We're going to read 2 of these. We are also going to be reading from things that would be called textbooks. And these are not really secondary sources, though I suppose we could use that term to apply to them. Okay. They are not interpreting directly the primary sources. They're more relying on just having read a whole lot of stuff about the period and write a kind of synthetic account of it. Technically, that's called a tertiary source, but let's not split hairs too much here. Okay. There will be a textbook for this class. In fact, there are kind of 2 of them, right? This one and this one. These are the first 2 books. If some of you are looking at the price tag of this class, my apologies. It's history. It's just the nature of the beast in some cases, right? I would love to write a, textbook on ancient Greek history and charge a minimum amount for it, right? But I have too many things to do. Okay, so
This, and I've looked at a lot of different textbooks. This is the one that I like. Oxford tends to charge a little less than some others, but you may be looking at the $70 price tag of a new version of that and saying, wow, that's a lot. Okay. I'm going to blame Oxford University Press and the whole textbook racket here. Right? Maybe you'll be able to find a used copy of it. If you happen to have the 3rd edition, I'm not going to hold that against you. It might be cheaper if you're really kind of struggling with money. Believe me, I made it through undergraduate with 2 kids. Okay, I get that, right? So I now have 7, if you were wondering. Have for the last 6 years, and we're long done having children. But yeah, there are no more coming. Okay, if you were wondering that too. If you can find a 3rd edition, I'm not going to hold it against you. I mean, for whatever reason, they produced the 4th edition and they changed it almost not at all. I mean, there's very, very few changes in this book. This one is, in a sense, both a secondary and a primary source because while it, contains accounts of the art and architecture of ancient Greece, it also has nice photographs of a lot of this art, and that's the primary source material, right? So we will treat those images as primary sources. Unfortunately, we can't go on a field trip to the Met or to the Smithsonian or to the British Museum or to the Pergamon Museum in Berlin or one of these places to actually see ancient Greek art in 3D. That would be awesome if we could, all right, but we can rely on these 2D images. And I assume if you go on to the website of the Met or something, the Met has really great collection of ancient Greek art, okay? The best of any museum I've ever been to. I've been to a lot. And so if you want to go on the website of the Met and take a look at some of the attic pottery, for instance, which is absolutely spectacular, right? Feel free to do that. It might help you. Okay. I'll talk more about the books that are required for this class in a minute. What are we trying to learn in this class? Well, like any history class, we're going to enhance our critical thinking and our writing skills, evidence-based argument. We're going to try to become better at communicating orally in that you're required to participate in class, or at least there's a graded component based on participation. But part of the goal of this class, I'm just trying to paraphrase what I've written here, is to learn how to be puzzled by a very foreign culture in ways that are productive. Now, you might be thinking, okay, the ancient Greeks are the originators of Western civilization, arguably. And so we're part of Western civilization, so all of this should be really familiar. If you have that notion, you will be disabused rather quickly. The ancient Greeks are weird, right? I think that we might understand alien civilizations more than some of the things we see out of the ancient Greeks. They are very strange people by our reckoning. And you may encounter some of their sources and say, I have no idea what sense to make this. I hope that happens, because that is the first stage of being what I call productively puzzled. Now, if you stop there and just say, I have no idea what sense to make of this and I don't want to do anything else, then that's not productive. Right? That's just being puzzled and leaving in that fashion. But if you say, this makes no sense to me, let me figure this out. Right? Like looking at a puzzle that's in 1,000 pieces and seeing only a few colors and shapes and textures and things. And, starting to find things that fit together, right? That's the process that I want to try to take. There will be little, I think, that is really familiar. Right? And that's by design. So, let's all dive into this together and
go through that process of becoming puzzled and then trying to figure out what it means based on, well, close study, close reading, discussion with each other. You know, there's this whole process of interpretation that happens in history where you have to start with the historical context. You have to figure out what was going on in the period, at least in rough outline. And I don't just mean a chronological list of events. I mean, like, what were the circumstances? What was the social organization? What was, you know, what were the kind of dominant cultural trends and things like that? And then looking at the source material and saying, now that I know all of that about the context, what sense can I make of this? How can I take that knowledge and apply it in order to interpret this? So that's true for any history class, but it's especially true for something like ancient history. Questions about that? Now, as I write here, this process of trying to understand the people of ancient Greece on their terms, not our terms, because if we take our assumptions into this, we're going to go wrong. The ancient Greeks are not like us at all, right? If we want to understand them on their terms, this may require the setting aside of, I don't know, cultural, historical, religious notions about the ancient period. Okay, you may have formed some ideas about what ancient Greece was like from reading Percy Jackson, okay. Or reading the Bible, or something like that, right? Which is a wonderful ancient source. Okay. You may have to sort of set those things to the side and say, let me not take this into this because it may not be helpful. Now you might pick that up again and figure out how it all fits together. Where did Rick Riordan go right and where did he go horribly wrong? In other words, how is the Bible helpful or not? But you probably need to set it to the side, at least initially. Okay. These are the books. I went to the bookstore today. I'm like, I need this book for my ancient Greece class. And before I could say there are 8, I need this specific one. The person went to the back, and then she comes back. She's like, there are 8 books for that class. I'm like, yes, I know. I need this one, right? So, I mean, this is not out of sorts with history classes, the way they tend to run at Flagler College. So I'm not going to apologize for this, right? There's a lot of reading. But hopefully it's stimulating reading. I already showed you the textbook. This is the 4th edition. Like I said, if you are worried about costs and you find a cheaper edition or find a cheaper 3rd edition, then we'll just have to adjust the page numbers a little bit, but it'll work. Okay. The art, architecture, and history book I already showed you as well. Right. The main primary sources. And this is not all the primary sources because you will have online sources you have to access as well, but those will tend to be excerpted and fairly short. The longer, full-length primary sources that we're going to read in this class are, first of all, the Odyssey. Okay. We're going to read some tragedies. I think I have in there, Prometheus Unbound, Oedipus the King, what's the other one? Bacchae? I think I've got one from Aeschylus, one from Sophocles, one from Euripides. I think that's what I've got. Sorry, I can't remember. Let's put this together. Okay, that's how many things I've got to worry about right now. And then we're going to read The Clouds by Aristophanes. Okay. The Dover edition, this is like $5. This is a little more. This is like 12, something like that. Realize we're only going to read The Clouds, and so you might find you probably find it online for free. In fact, I guarantee you can. It's going to be a different translation, though. That's the only problem. So we're going to be using the Oxford edition in the class. If you have the other edition, I'm okay with that. Just you might get lost a little bit as we use this. The Signet edition of the Great Dialogues of Plato. This is not an expensive book. It's like $8 or something like that. Okay. And we're going to read some parts of the Republic. We're going to read. I can't remember all I've got on there. Anyway, we're going to read a couple of his dialogues, at least parts of them. And so those are the main primary sources. Now, like I said, this is not all. if you look at the daily schedule down here, okay, you'll see that, for instance, next time you need to read this excerpted work from Thucydides. This is from his History of the Peloponnesian War, but it's him talking about like really ancient Greeks, okay, the early history of the Hellenes. That, if you look under modules, you'll see it's here. Okay. Firefox can't open this page, so if you click on it up here, it will go to the link, and you can see it's only like 10 paragraphs or something. Right? So not a whole lot. Right. And there will be a few of these interspersed throughout the semester, never more than 1 or 2 a day. That's not to say there's not a lot of reading, because there is for this class, but these online sources are definitely manageable. Okay. You need to read, book 1 of the Iliad, I think. Some selections from Hesiod's Works and Days, and a few other things, right? I don't have all of these up on Canvas yet. That page is still under construction, but I've got at least the first 2-3 weeks of them available for you. I will get the rest up there shortly. All right, any questions about what you need to, oh wait, no. And then, I didn't finish. There are 2 monographs, like I've said. Victor Davis Hanson's The Other Greeks. Has anybody heard the name Victor Davis Hanson before? You'd have to, I don't know, you'd have to have encountered a certain, I don't know exactly how to put it. He is a public intellectual, extremely outspoken in certain ways. You might want to look him up and see, kind of what his political opinions are and things like that. You may disagree with him fiercely, all right? But, whatever his leanings are, he is a fine scholar of ancient Greece. He may be retired now. He taught for many years at Fresno State. He was simultaneously, and this is one thing that makes him interesting, simultaneously a farmer. So he taught at Fresno State. He wrote all sorts of books that were highly influential, that kind of reshaped the field of ancient Greece. And then he ran I think he farmed mostly like tree nuts, like almonds, and he's in Central California, right? So that makes sense. He takes his experience as a farmer and, of course, his wonderful training and scholarly acumen into thinking about the way the Greeks developed in the Archaic Age, as they emerged from the Greek Dark Age, when they began to form the essential structures of ancient Greek society, right? The polis, the hoplite phalanx, and a few other things. So some of you may be familiar with some of these terms. If you're not, you will be shortly. Okay. And tries to tie together their identity as farmers with the development of these sorts of things. Right. In doing so, you have to realize he is a public intellectual. He is making a statement that he intends people will listen to, and that will help to inform kind of their political opinions, right, or their cultural opinions. This book has produced one of the most interesting mixes of student reactions of anything I've ever assigned. Okay. Do not be daunted overmuch by the size of this. This is one of the longest books that I assign on a regular basis in my classes. Suffice it to say, you don't have to read every page of this. Okay. I mean, I'm asking you to figure out what the argument is, to read as much as you can. This is a good exercise in trying to learn how to speed read or skim. Right, and I will help you do that. I will give you some tips on how to do that. Right? So don't look at this 500-page book and say, "Oh my gosh, what has Dr. Young gotten into?" And then go on to rate my professors and condemn me as you can do that all you want. I don't care. But this is not an exercise in cruelty. There's a reason that I assigned this book. I think it's compelling. I also think it's very controversial. I don't necessarily agree with everything Hanson says, and but it's a fun book to interact with if you give it the time that it needs. And then, because I want to talk about the Spartans, and everybody wants to talk about the Spartans because they're super cool, right? But interestingly, we're going to read a monograph on
not on Spartan warriors, but on Spartan women. Because if the Spartan warriors are cool, they're also rather predictable, right? It's all about war and training, and that's pretty much their lives, right? The women are less predictable. You might think that, given how militaristic the Spartans were, that women enjoyed few privileges and took not only a secondary role in the society, but were entirely shunned from any sort of decision making. But actually, the Spartan women had a surprising amount of agency and latitude to function. And this is one of the things that Pomeroy talks about, just to whet your appetite, among other things. Spartan women were often free to have extramarital affairs. They were not only free, they were encouraged. Their husbands would even set them up with a lover while they were off on campaign. This would often be someone the husband himself admired. Because why? Any ideas? Were Spartan men just like kinky like that? Or, I mean, what was going on here?
Like a gift.
Yeah, I like you here. Have a turn with my wife. I mean, in a way, it might have been. Well, there are a couple possibilities. One that seems pretty obvious here is that Spartan men, I mean, the Spartans were always off on campaign. They were always doing military things. But they needed to keep the population going, right? And so if the man is going to be away for months and his wife is ready to get pregnant again, right, he may not be able to do the deed. And so he finds someone he admires and says, well, I'd really like a son with your characteristics, right? Will you sleep with my wife? Okay. But one of the things Pomeroy finds is that this isn't just the men like making plans about the women. The women seem to have had some input, expressed some opinions about this, may have been, meeting their own sexual desires as part of this, right? That they were into that sort of thing, okay? Which is a really compelling look at, what otherwise seems to be a fairly predictable society. I've given away some of the best parts of the book now. I apologize, man. I shouldn't have done that. There's a lot more, though. Okay, there's a lot of really great stuff in this. And Pomeroy has a sort of sustained argument that she carries through that book, and we'll interact with that. Okay. So that's what you have to read. Hopefully, this is amenable to all of you, and you're looking forward to this now. Okay. Right. What do you have to do then, besides read? Well, there are 6 papers, a final exam, and class participation. And that's it. It's a lot. I expect you to come to class prepared. I expect you to have read the stuff that's assigned for that day before coming to class and be ready to talk about it. Thus, participation is a significant component of your grade. If you are reluctant to say much in class, if you're shy, if you don't want to sound too ambitious or sound like a nerd or whatever it is, then get over it. Okay? No, I'm serious. Let's be serious. You don't have to talk your head off in this class to do well in participation. One of the things that I tell students, one of the best ways to participate is, simply be prepared. And, as you find material in the assigned reading that you have questions about, write down those questions and ask the questions. You don't have to make a comment. Just ask a bunch of questions. Okay? These can be even like factual questions, like simple facts, like who was this guy again? Or about when was this? Right? Those are not stupid questions. Okay? Certainly, I encourage you to ask analytical questions, or if you're puzzled by what. Now, I didn't quite understand Pomeroy's point here. Can we look at this page?
I mean, those are wonderful for keeping class discussion lively. So I encourage you to ask questions like that. But that requires being prepared. You will not do well in participation if you don't come to class prepared, if you sit there and just try to have a passive experience. You still might learn something, but it's not going to be nearly as productive or meaningful for that matter, as if you're actively involved. And you will do better on the written assignments. Now, with the primary sources, you're required to write 4 papers. There are 4 long primary sources. The Odyssey, the Tragedies, the Plato, and the Art. Right. The Art is something we're going to read we'll read parts of that book all semester. So there's not one specific assignment, which is read the whole art book. Okay, it's when we encounter this period, we're going to look at the art from that period as part of that discussion. So the art paper is not actually due till the very end of the term, but you can turn it in earlier if you like. If you want to write a paper on Mycenaean art and turn it in, like next week, that's fine. That would be wonderful to get it out of the way. 2 of these are longer papers, and 2 are shorter. There are no prompts for these papers. Now, this may be disorienting to you. Okay. Suffice it to say that one of the skills that students of history need to develop is the ability to ask their own questions about sources. I will help you with this. In fact, I have on the syllabus a set of suggestions for writing a primary source analysis paper. Right? Ways to think up good questions, ways to get to a good question, which you can then answer. The answer to that question becomes your thesis. Right? If you get a prompt, that means the professor has done that first step for you. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but in an upper division course like this, it's important to begin to exercise that skill of asking your own questions. If you need some help, I am more than willing to help you figure out questions. Right? So just talk to me in office hours. 2 of these papers are longer, that is 6 to 8 pages. 2 of them are shorter, 3 to 4 pages. The longer papers are graded at 40 points each, the shorter papers at 20 points each. Overall, 120 points out of the 250 in the class. This is almost half your grade. You have to write a long paper on the Odyssey. That is mandatory. The others you can choose. I want to do long, I want to do short, whatever it is. So you've got a long paper coming up within the first couple of weeks of the class. This is baptism by fire, so to speak. But I find the Odyssey is actually something that students can do pretty well on, with coming up with a good research question and compelling pieces. There's a lot to that text that there's a lot of scope for interpretation. Any questions about that assignment? Book reviews. So the 2 monographs we read, you need to write a book review. I assume that if you've taken other history classes, you have written some of these. So there are professors here who assign lots and lots of book reviews. I don't do as many as some of the other professors, but you will have to do 2 of these in class. I do have a set of guidelines for writing a book review that I've prepared. It's on the syllabus toward the end, so take a look at that. There is a final exam. This will be drawn from a bank of essay questions that I will give you, and I mean literally drawn, right? So I will give you, I think it's about 7 or 8 essay questions toward the end of the term, and on final exam day, assuming we are still in this class and not doing this online, all right, we might be doing that and we'll adjust, but if we are still here, then I will come with like 8 numbers on pieces of paper in a hat, and you will choose randomly which ones you're going to write on. Okay. So you have to be prepared to write on all of them. Okay, those are the assignments. So fairly straightforward endeavor here. Yes? No, these are the ones that are assigned. It's the other Greeks and the Spartan women. Yeah, there's no outside. You don't go find your own book for this class. I certainly encourage you to read widely, even outside of the assigned stuff, but those are the ones that are assigned. I accept late work with penalty. Just be aware of that, right? If you miss an assignment, you are not sunk forever. Those who know me know that I'm pretty lenient on things like this, but I do dock some points. Okay? Through 1 week late, I will take a letter grade off. After that, it's 2 letter grades. But even if you write a paper at the end of the semester, it's better to get dock 2 letter grades and get a 0. Right? I do not encourage you to procrastinate, but I know that things happen. Okay. Now, this is a special semester. You may have heard, these are unprecedented times. If I read that in an email one more time, I think I'm going to put my fist through the computer. Right? I'm so tired of reading that. I'm going to be flexible on a lot of things. Okay. If that app shows up red for you one day because you had a cough, please be honest. And vice versa, right? If you're not sick, please answer truthfully. Okay? Don't, create a false red screen to get out of doing something. There's a lot of scope for abuse in all of this. I'm sure you've all figured that out at this point. All right? Just be honest, okay? I understand things happen. And we're living in unprecedented times. So, let's all work together and we can get through all this. You probably heard that too. I didn't mean to contribute to the ridiculous rhetoric about this whole situation. My attendance policy, if you don't miss a class, and if you don't have an unexcused absence, I should say, then right off the top, I give you 3 extra credit points. That's like 1.5% just free of a grade. All right, that's kind of amazing, actually. Okay. Certainly, unexcused absences do not count against you. So, if you have no unexcused absences, I will give you 3 extra credit points. If you only have 1 unexcused absence, I will give you 1 extra credit point. At 2 absences, you get nothing, but you lose nothing. Over 2 unexcused absences, I start docking points from your participation grade. All right. One point per absence. So be aware of that. Okay. If you miss 8 classes over the course of the semester, they're all, unexcused, then you're going to lose 6 points in your participation grade. That's a 1.5 letter grade on that assignment, right? On just participation. In a class that only has 250 points possible, you just gave up 2.5% of your grade for being absent 8 times. It's a free country, and my attendance policy when it comes to number of classes is pretty lenient. Students who incur 10 absences will be withdrawn automatically from the class. Frankly, if you miss 10 times, you're not probably going to pass the class anyway. So it's a mercy to you to give you a withdrawal. Right? Come to class, be prepared. If you are unexcused, do the work, meaning watch the video that I'm going to make of every class session. I will post these on YouTube, and I'll put the links on Canvas. YouTube does add captions. Hopefully they're accurate enough that if you need that, you can use it effectively. If the captions are really, really bad and you need these things, please let me know. There are alternate ways to do it. They're a lot more difficult, but I, of course, am willing to make any accommodations. Academic honesty is another topic that I always try to bring up here. I take especially plagiarism and cheating very seriously. These are grave offenses. Okay. Plagiarism is not only dishonest, but it's against the law. Okay. Interestingly, one of our presidential candidates right now, this is his third time running for president. His first time, he actually had some momentum going. And it turns out he had, and you know, he says inadvertently, but he had plagiarized some of his speeches from a British politician. I'm talking about Joe Biden here. And it sunk his campaign. He's like, I didn't, you know, I was really inspired by that. I just started adopting some of the rhetoric and necessarily realized how much I was plagiarizing, right? I mean, and I don't know, you can take him at his word or you can say he's full of crap, but for whatever it was, I mean, the plagiarism is what sunk the campaign. And he paid for it politically for a long time. Seems to have gotten over it and he's running for president again, for the third time now. But just to, as an example of like the consequences of even, you know, according to his take anyway, inadvertent plagiarism. You can go to jail in grad school for plagiarizing. So, you know, just to give you a sense of the gravity of the whole thing, right? But it is an insult to the learning process to cheat. If you are up against it, if you're struggling, come talk to me. Don't cheat. Don't go buy a paper on the internet or something like that. Right? Come talk to me. I can help you through this. We can come up with a plan that will allow you to succeed. Everything that you turn in will be submitted to Canvas. You will never submit a paper copy. I grade everything on an iPad with a stylus. I give written comments. Hopefully you can read my chicken scratch. It's difficult. This is an exercise in paleography. It's a nice thing to have to learn. All right. If you can't, then let me know, and I will explain my chicken scratch. Right. And then I try to give some written comments, at least for the first few assignments. Later in the semester, not do as much of that. Okay. And then, you know, disabilities accommodation, Title IX stuff, all of this is important. You've heard it before, hopefully, and I am committed to all of those things. This is a safe place. Respect diverse opinions here, absolutely, right? The ancient Greeks were themselves surprisingly diverse in their opinions about things, so we're going to take them as a model. Okay. Any lingering questions or points you want to clarify about this? So let me spend the last few minutes here. I meant to pull this up beforehand. So let's just pull up a random map of Greece, trying to capture the ancient Greek map here a little bit. What's striking about this map, about the geography of Greece? What? It's a lot bigger than modern day Greece. Okay, yeah, modern day Greece is like this. Right. The Greeks anciently lived. Plato, anybody know how Plato described them? Plato had a metaphor for the Greeks of his day. He said the Greeks are frogs sitting around a pond. The pond in this case is the Aegean Sea. Right? The Greeks lived on every shore. They did not live very far from the shore. Right? Even in the interior here of Boeotia, this area, or the interior of the Peloponnesus. We're talking, this is only like 30, 40 miles from the sea. Okay? It's like driving to Palatka, and that's as far inland as the Greeks ever made it, because that's what their geography did. So, what kind of people are we talking about then when we discuss the ancient Greeks? What are some assumptions that you
may have, knowing that now about them. Right? Yeah, by far the easiest way to travel, fastest, most productive, was the sea. Because, and this is what is not captured with this map, right? There's a mountain, we can see this in 3D, it's like 10,000 feet above sea level right here. It's called Mount Olympus. All right. And the whole of ancient Greece was, well, these are all volcanic islands and peninsulas formed by volcanoes back in Precambrian times. The earth was new and cooling. Okay. And so this whole area is incredibly mountainous. Sometimes you have the sea, and then abruptly, Greece just juts from the sea. And there are cliffs, hundreds of feet high, where you can jump into the ocean if you're into that sort of thing. Probably not recommended without training or, well, maybe some lost brain cells or something.
Or booze,
What's that?
or alcohol.
Yeah, let's hope that's not the primary mover in such an exercise. So, the Greeks were both people of the sea and people of the mountains simultaneously. And because there are so many mountains, there's actually not a whole lot of farmland. The land was not arable. Only about 20% of the landmass that the ancient Greeks lived on could be cultivated. Right? So what are the results of that? Okay, they ate fish, yes, but that surprisingly was not like the staple of their diet. Okay, think about Greek food. What anybody like Greek food? Anybody connoisseur of Greek food? Okay. What did the Greeks eat? Modern Greek food is it's obviously there's some differences, but it is indicative of the diet that the ancient Greeks had to. Well, pita, flatbread, okay, and what do you dip your pita in? Okay, so they grew things like chickpeas, yes, but probably more commonly would be olive oil. And some vegetables, herbs, things like that, green vegetables. And for meat, those who could afford it, it probably would have been mutton or lamb rather than fish. Now, they did eat fish. Okay. The Greeks are the ones who came up with calamari, right? They ate squid. At some point, they developed that anyway. But, shockingly, Greeks did eat fish, but they relied more on bread and olive oil, and for meat, as I said, sheep or lambs. And then they made cheese out of the sheep and goat milk. It's telling that in the Odyssey, when Odysseus and his men show up on the island of Polyphemus the Cyclops, that they go into his cave, and the Greek custom of hospitality would dictate that they can help themselves to whatever they find, right? And so, what do they find in the cave of the Cyclops? The guys are starving. They've been out at sea for weeks, right? What do they find in the cave? Two main things. Okay. Well, the sheep are outside, and he is a shepherd, because the Cyclops is a shepherd, right? That's telling. They find cheese and wine. Wine is the other major component of the Greek diet. Right? Grapes and wine. No fish in there.
These guys aren't fishermen. I mean, shockingly, they ate very little fish, right? So, there are some assumptions that we might bring to this that don't necessarily hold out. And that's just, talking about their diet. Sheep tend to do well in mountain pastures. There are a lot of mountain pastures in Greece. And so they raise sheep and goats. Most people do worldwide. So they're frogs sitting around a pond, and they live in a place where there's not a lot of farmland, but they prefer to eat things like bread and olive oil and drink wine and graze and eat mutton and eat fish. So what else is that going to lead us to understand about the Yeah, exactly. If they have a taste for things that they can't necessarily grow in abundance in their own land, they've got to figure out where to get it, right? Well, it just so turns out that there's a waterway here. Right? What is this waterway? What's it called? There's a city right here, which is one of the biggest cities in the world now. Okay. What's that city? Istanbul, or formerly called Constantinople. But before it was called Constantinople, it was called Byzantium, which was actually a Greek city. There's also a city right here, very anciently, back in the Mycenaean period, called what? Anybody know? Troy. All right, which probably was not a Greek city. There probably is some historical basis to the Trojan War. It was instead a city founded by and inhabited by people who were not Greek, most likely Hittites, because the Hittite Empire was down here. So this was like a Hittite outpost on the Aegean. That different people, the Greeks in the case of Byzantium and a lot of other cities up here in Thrace, and the Hittites seemingly built a city right here, is indicative of how important this waterway was. The waterway itself is called the Dardanelles Strait, and it links the Aegean with what? What's this? The Black Sea. It helps to know some geography in this class. Quickly. All right. To spot the main parts of Greece on the map. I'm not going to give you a geography quiz like I do in some classes, but it is going to be helpful if you figure all this stuff out. And the area around the Black Sea, especially the region here and the region to the north of that, is one of the most agriculturally productive regions of the world. The land there is, well, comparable in fertility to, say, the American Midwest, like Iowa and Nebraska. I just drove across the Great Plains. When was this? Well, I guess it was last week. Okay. A week ago, I woke up in Kearney, Nebraska, and got in a car and drove to Nashville. I was moving. Yeah, why did you do that? I was moving my daughter back across the country, back home. COVID sort of forced. Anyway, there's a long story. I don't need to get into it, right? And I mean, the land is so incredibly lush and fertile, right? The corn and the soybean fields, and if you get a little further south into Kansas, the wheat fields, right? It's obvious how fertile this land is. Well, the land around the Black Sea is similar, especially for cereal agriculture. And so the Greeks were able to tap into that. But at times, control of this was disputed, as in the case of Troy, probably, where the Greeks went to war, not because there was a beautiful woman who was absconded with by the Prince of Troy, so maybe there's some historical basis to that too, who knows, right? But because this waterway was tremendously important for trade. And it brought things the Greeks relied upon. You're going to see when Athens forms a trade-based empire, in the 5th century. Now, one of the things that they do is secure all of the coastland, and specifically the coastland that leads through the Dardanelles. That was purposeful, and that gave them an absolute corner on the market of most things that the Greeks prized, and they were able to use the economic might that came out of that, well, to do a lot of things. One of those was to fight against the Spartans for 30 years and really destroy the whole Greek world, right? And we'll talk about that. So, little lesson in geography there. This is absolutely essential, right? You're going to read a little bit about this in the introduction of the textbook. Don't neglect that part, right? This is important stuff. Okay. All right. Any questions? Any lingering comments? Okay, you're free to go. Thank you. I'll see you next Tuesday.